Half-Life. Just saying the name brings up amazing thoughts of whacking head crabs with your crowbar, or whacking barnacles with your crowbar, or whacking bull squids with your crowbar, even whacking scientists with your crowbar, if you know what I mean. I mean, all of us here know this game is amazing, right? But does the gameplay hold up to today's standards? How do the graphics look? And why do we all have to wear these ridiculous ties? All this and more will be answered in this little review of Half-Life. I should go ahead and mention the real reason this is taking so long. Well, I took the time to write a script, and I printed it out, and at the last second I thought, I don't need a script, and then I threw the script away. You know, I thought maybe I could just give my opinion. It's okay if you have your own opinion on stuff. That's great. I mean, you have your opinions, I have mine. I'll keep mine, you keep yours. So, I don't know. I'm just stalling right now, actually. Let's get into the video. Let's actually talk about what we're supposed to be talking about. Half-Life was released on October 8th, 1998 by Valve Software, which was co-founded by Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington on August 24th, 1996. Okay, so a fun fact about Gabe Newell. He dropped out of college to work at Microsoft and then quit Microsoft to co-found Valve with Mike Harrington, so I think it's a safe thing to say that he doesn't finish things he starts. And with that, Half-Life. The game starts with a tram ride, about a 5-minute tram ride to be exact. You take the place of Gordon Freeman, a theoretical physicist who just graduated from Harvard University with an MIT education. Or at least, I think it's Harvard. I'm actually not that sure anymore. There are a lot of neat things you get to see on this tram ride. One to note, the very first neat thing you do get to see is Barney knocking on a door. Now, we'll refer to this Barney as real Barney, because you'll see in a minute that there are a lot of Barneys, and so it's hard to keep track of all of them. This Barney, keep a note of him, because he's going to show up in a later game and a couple of games after that. So, yeah, he's pretty important. On the train ride, you'll get to see all sorts of crazy things. You'll get to see robots lifting boxes, trains, other trams in the distance, open spaces, toxic waste, workers, forklifts, missiles. At one point, though, your train stops next to another one, and you can look out the window and notice this guy in a blue suit. You know, he has pale skin, a bony facial structure. He doesn't fit in with the rest of the scientists you've seen so far in the distance. And he adjusts his tie a little bit, and the train continues on to its destination. You know, you can't quite put your finger on it, but something about this man gives you chills, you know. He just stands out. And that's that. You get to your destination, Barney tells you, well, I should probably say fake Barney, because this is fake Barney. Fake Barney tells you that you're running late, and slowly lets you out of the train, and slowly, I mean very slowly, I don't think it was intentional, but oh my god, he says you're running late, and then he just goes so slow. He slowly lets you into Sector C facility. One cool thing about the Barneys in this game is, if you press the use key on them, they could say a phrase out of like a small pool of phrases. And one that really took off was, hey, catch me later, I'll buy you a beer.
Catch me later, I'll buy you a beer.
And it became like a meme. It happened so fast that they ended up bringing up that phrase again in later games. I'm not going to tell you which one. I'm pretty sure you can already guess which one it is. So this is where the game really opens up. There are 3 sections here, 2 of which are required to progress the story, one of which is hinting at where you're going to have to go later in the game. There are quite a few things you can actually do in this starting area. You can go to this scientist's computer and turn it on. Under Fake Barney's desk, there's a button that you can press that triggers an alarm. He will get mad at you though. On the back of the room, there is this map of the world. There's a dot over New Mexico. This is actually where the facility is located. Continuing on, you can go to a break room, mess with some guy's microwave casserole that will come in later, as in later in a different game. Next, you go to the locker room where you put on your suit, grab a suit battery, and continue on to the barrel. I don't know why it's called the barrel. That's what they call it. If you decide to go down the third section, before you reach the end, there's this room with a window. If you look in the window, you can see this man in the blue suit again talking to another scientist. How he beats you there, I'm not really sure, but it's a cool Easter egg. So once you get to the test chamber, your colleagues inform you about what is going to take place. Basically, they took this crystal from a border world. A border world is basically a truck stop, but instead of being in between states, it's in between dimensions. They're going to have you put this crystal into this giant anti-mass spectrometer, which is going to extract stuff out of the crystal, I guess to see what it's made of. Once you get into the chamber, you start the machine and wait for the crystal to be delivered to it. Once the crystal's delivered to it, you put the crystal in, and then, let's say, not so good stuff happens. The machine explodes, kills the scientist in the observation room, and teleports you away. I'm gonna let you just see it for yourself. So basically all hell breaks loose. Once you leave the test chamber, your goal is to escape the facility without being killed. This goal doesn't change until near the end of the game, when it does to killing a giant monster. But we'll get more into that near the end of the game. I'm going to go ahead and talk about each chapter in order, starting with Unforeseen Consequences, the beginning of the Black Mesa incident. You start in the same chamber as the anti-mass spectrometer, where you just left off, except this time it is extremely destroyed. Once you make it back up, you meet with who I'm going to call Dr. Vance, or Eli Vance. He doesn't tell you his name, but we learn his name in a different game. He basically tells you to go to the surface and get help, and then lets you on through to the rest of the facility. From here, you meet up with the fake Barney fighting a new enemy type, a headcrab zombie. This is where a neat aspect of the game comes in. From the beginning, you're never told whether you are a good guy or a bad guy. You basically get to pick and choose what you do. So in this section, you can take your crowbar and go ahead and either kill the zombies to help Barney, or kill Barney and take his pistol. It's really up to you what you want to do. After that, you make it through the lobby area again, except this time it's destroyed. Some wacky antics with a scientist ensue. And you basically make your way back to the airlock from the beginning of the game, the one where Barney wouldn't let you through. Barney dies, and then you get to take his pistol, refill your health, and continue on to meet a new enemy known as the Houndeye. To not get too in-depth, the Houndeye is like a dog, except it does noise shockwaves. They give you a chance to figure out how these enemies work, and then introduce you to another new enemy, the Vortigons. Unforeseen Consequences is like a chapter where you get to learn how everything works and get a feel for the weapons that you're given and the enemies that are introduced. You get to experiment interesting ways to kill the enemies and solve problems. At one point, you meet up with a bridge that has been destroyed, and this is where you're introduced to two new enemies at the same time, the barnacle and the bull squid. The barnacle is like this parasite that hangs from the ceiling and has a long tongue sort of thing that when you come up to it, it grabs you and starts pulling you up to its mouth to eat you. You do have a second to react and kill it with your crowbar. The bull squid is as it sounds. It's like a bull, kind of looks like a squid. It'll spit an acid projectile at you, and if you get close enough, it'll start to charge you. Once you get past this section, you find an elevator and take the elevator further up into the next chapter, Office Complex. Office Complex is as it sounds. It takes you through a large office complex. Eventually, you go through a large meat locker, and then into the storage area, which is where the next chapter starts, and which is where you meet a new enemy, and it turns out this one isn't an alien, it is a human. As a matter of fact, it is the U.S. military.
Last, thank God you're here.
The HECU, or Hazardous Environment Combat Unit, has been assigned to wipe out any remnants of the Black Mesa incident, which means killing everybody and everything they see. So far, all the enemies you've encountered have had attacks that are easily dodgeable, but the HECU Marines have guns, and guns mean hit scan, and hit scan means when you're in their line of sight and they are holding down the trigger, you are going to take damage. They easily balance it out, though, with grenades. They usually throw grenades to flush you out of cover, but in some cases, they can throw a lot of grenades, and it can get really annoying. Other than that, the HECU Marines are pretty good enemies. They're pretty smart enemies, too. They also have, like, a radio, and you can actually hear them communicating through the radio. Although their grammar isn't so on point. Near the end of the chapter, you do get to see the surface for the first time since the beginning of the game, and let's just say it's not doing too good. It's actually doing pretty bad. Once we quickly make it back underground, crawl through some vents, emerge on the other side, press a button to open a giant door, we make it to the next chapter of the game, Blast Pit. Blast Pit is probably my third favorite chapter, following Office Complex and Unforeseen Consequences. This chapter introduces you to the tram. Although it's only used for this small little part, it'll be reintroduced in a couple chapters. Trust me. The rest of the chapter revolves around you trying to fight a giant monster. It's not the monster I mentioned earlier, though. That monster's at the end of the game. What makes this alien different from the rest in the entire game is the fact that it can't see. It detects you by listening. And I'm pretty sure this clip I'm about to show you really sums up everything I would have to say about this creature.
No! No! Get it off me! Get it out! Get him! Be quiet. This thing hears us.
Because it only detects you by hearing, there are some easy ways to sneak past it. Just stay crouched. But there are barricaded off doors that you do need to open, which is why they give you a giant crate of grenades before you enter. You're supposed to utilize the grenades not only to blast open the doors, but to distract the alien and sneak past. After you sneak past the alien, the mission goes pretty simple. You basically turn on the power to start a test rocket, and because the alien was not so smart and decided to pop up where they're testing a rocket, basically you press the button, the rocket engine starts, and you get to enjoy the show, and that's really the end of the chapter. Power Up sees you fighting another giant monster. Again, this is not the one I mentioned at the beginning of the video. That will be at the end of the video. This monster, although a lot smaller than the one from the previous chapter, can move and can shoot fire out of its hands, so I kind of find this one a lot more terrifying than the previous alien. This chapter is pretty similar, if not completely identical, to the previous one. Instead of getting the fuel pumping into the engine, you just start the power. You go through a bunch of long winding corridors, but instead of just fighting aliens, in this chapter you get to fight a lot of Marines. If you use your smarts, you won't get killed, okay? Once starting the power, you go back into the main area, lure the giant alien thing into a little transformer room thing, I don't know what it's called, and start the power, which leads to a very satisfying death. After that, you get the tram moving, and basically you're on your way to the next chapter. On a Rail. I don't really like this chapter. On a Rail is probably the longest chapter in the entire game, and is also my least favorite chapter of the entire game. I can see multiple reasons why this chapter was put in, to expand the game length. I don't know. Probably not that long. Valve's pretty noble. I don't think they would do that. But I can see why they would have it to increase the scale of the Black Mesa Research Facility. As if you didn't think it was big then, this chapter makes it feel really big, because you're traveling, not only traveling a great distance, it takes you a long time to travel that distance. On this chapter, you basically get to fight a plethora of enemies, from hound eyes, bull squids, head crabs, vortigaunts. But not only them, there's a lot of military and a lot of infighting with the aliens and the military, which you do get to see, and it does look pretty neat. Other than that, I feel like the mechanic of the tram was just overdone throughout this entire chapter. I can see how a lot of people could say, if we didn't have On a Rail, we wouldn't have the canals or the coastal chapters in the sequel, and I do agree with that. Those are great arguments. If we didn't have this, we wouldn't have that. This is basically like a beta to the sequel. But everything in this chapter just felt so redundant and long and drawn out. And even though I do get some laughs out of this chapter, it is overall my least favorite chapter. So, how about we just get on to the next chapter, please? I mean, there's really not that much to talk about. At the end of On a Rail, you do make it to the Lambda complex, and you get to launch off a rocket into space, which I'm pretty sure is trying to close all these interdimensional portals, and then you continue on. Apprehension, residue processing, questionable ethics, surface tension, and forget about Freeman all feel like the same chapter. What I mean by that is they all feel like they should belong in the same chapter. We finished up Gordon's long journey just to launch a damn rocket. Now we need to finish up his journey to the Lambda Core, which will take a lot longer than On a Rail. These next few chapters will see Gordon get ambushed and knocked out, almost killed in a trash compactor, From the surface back to the Lambda complex, back to the surface, back to the Lambda complex, finally back to the surface for quite a while. Then to the Lambda core, which is the chapter after these chapters. They try to mix up everything by having some large industrial area with a lot of conveyor belts. That section was kind of annoying, but I thought it looked neat. Then you got some surface fighting with the military. Then you go back into the facility and fight some military in there. Questionable ethics takes place almost all inside the facility. And that was a good chapter. By the end of the chapter, you get into surface tension, which is almost all on the surface, so there's a contrast there, which is mostly fighting between the aliens and the military, and then the military and you, and then the aliens and you, or all of it at the same time. People don't notice this, but games are filled with a lot of scripted events. And I honestly don't think we'd have scripted events like we do now if it wasn't for the scripted events in Surface Tension, which look amazing. Even though this game's really old, it just looks amazing. Also, that part near the end when you come out of the tube and you're on the cliffside, I can't help but gawk at that to this day. It just looks amazing. It looks beautiful. But in the end, there's not much to change up the gameplay except for the large amount of infighting and scripted sequences. There's a couple snipers here and there, and a minefield. 2 minefields, actually. By the end of it, you do reach your second final goal, which is getting to the Lambda core. And despite how generic a couple of these chapters felt, they were still really fun to play. I'm starting to notice how a few of these chapters have a similar gimmick. Lambda core sees you going back and forth to start up a portal. Yeah, bet you haven't seen that before. This portal is going to take you to a different section of Lambda core where you can go into a different portal to get to Zen. The place I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Yeah, we're mentioning it again. We're actually going there now, which is the final destination for Gordon Freeman. The beginning of the chapter is just run-of-the-mill going back and forth, fighting some aliens, pressing some buttons. There's some swimming in there. But once you do get the portal started, it's like a little puzzle. Now, I don't know how I miss it on every single playthrough, but there is a code hidden somewhere in the chapter that actually tells you which ones to go through. I can't seem to find it. I don't know what's wrong with me. Every time I play it, I can't find it. But I managed to get through the chapter anyway. Once you get through that puzzle, you meet up with a scientist and a security guard ready to give you your final job. You are going to go and kill this giant alien monster thing that has been holding the portal open this whole time, letting the aliens come to Earth. After you leave this room restocking everything you can, there's the final battle at Black Mesa, where you just wait for the portal to open, fighting these little mini versions of the final boss. So yeah, it's not that long, and once you finish it, you just jump into the portal, and then you're in Zen. All of the chapters in Zen are basically taking what you've learned up to this point in low gravity and a jump boost to help you make really long jumps in space. I'm going to go ahead and take all the chapters in Zen and kind of mold them into one, because Zen is honestly, the whole last section of the game is really short, and each chapter in Zen is about 15 to 20 minutes long, when every chapter previous has been 45 minutes to an hour long, which you can use that to get a good idea of how long the game is as a whole. You jump some, you do a little puzzle, and then you get into the Gonarch Slayer. Now, just take a close look at the Gonarch. It is what it looks like. Yes, it is a giant spider with a testicle. And I'm not making that up. You can look it up on the internet. You can find proof. That's what it is. Now, the Gonarch is supposedly like a giant head crab that shoots out baby head crabs. The fight between you and the Gonarch is pretty scripted. You stay in this little arena, you get it down to a certain point of health, and then it runs away to a different area. And once it gets to that area, you get it down to a certain point of health, and then it runs to a new area. And when you get to this area, you kill it. When you fight the Gonarch, it has a acid projectile and basically spits acid at you, and also shoots little baby head crabs out of its little sack. The battle itself isn't really that difficult. It's the fact that if you stray too far, you will fall into space and die. That's what got me most of the time. Other than that, the battle with the Gonarch is pretty easy. After you leave the Gonarch's lair, you enter some open areas where you fight mostly Vortigaunts and those tiny, whatever they're called. I really don't know the names of them. And occasionally a Houndier too. It can be pretty formulaic, but there are a couple really interesting areas where you have to find your way to the portal, and you have to use some bit of critical thinking. Other than that, these areas are pretty, typical. After this section, they start to put you up against large enemies and bosses from Black Mesa. You know, those enemies that you just felt like all the odds were stacked against you. Well, look how easy it is to kill them now. Yet that's the same enemy from Power Up. I didn't even break a sweat that time. The next area is the industrial section of Zen. This area is the weakest part of Zen, if not the entire game. It's filled with nothing but Vortigaunts, Gargantuas, and whatever those things are called. Throughout the entire chapter, you feel like you're at a disadvantage compared to them. Vortigaunts are everywhere, and there's barely any cover against them. There are barrels everywhere in the chapter that if you break open, Gargantuas will come out, which is never a good thing. And it seems like this entire section of Zen is against you. It just feels really unfair compared to the rest of the game. Throughout the industrial section, you will hop through a bunch of portals. Eventually, all these portals will lead to the final boss of the game. I'm not gonna lie, it kinda looks like a giant fetus. The Nihilint is the final boss of the game. This is the creature that has been holding all of these portals open, and this is your only chance to kill it. The Nihilint can only be killed by destroying 3 crystals that are inside its chamber. It can be really difficult to get to these 3 crystals because he is constantly throwing portals at you, teleporting you to different areas. You can dodge him, but it is pretty hard to do so. If you manage to come back alive from that area he teleported you to, he will throw whatever these are at you. And at 100 health and armor, one of these attacks, if it does hit you, can get you down to like 15, 20 health. So, yeah, be really careful. Destroying the crystals will only piss off the Nihilint even more. Eventually, it'll start to spawn in other enemies to try to kill you. Once destroying the 3 crystals, you can use these launch pads to boost you above its head and destroy the crystal inside of its head. Doing this for long enough will kill it, and the Nihilint's death is pretty satisfying to watch. The screen fades to black. Everything's quiet for a second. And then the man that has been following you throughout the entire game, you've probably seen him out of the corner of your eye, speaks to you for the first time.
Gordon Freeman in the flesh. Or rather, in the hazard suit. I took the liberty of relieving you of your weapons. Most of them were government property. As for the suit, I think you've earned it. The border world, then, is in our control for the time being, thanks to you. Quite a nasty piece of work you managed over there. I am impressed. That's why I'm here, Mr. Freeman. I have recommended your services to my employers. And they have authorized me to offer you a job. They agree with me that you have limitless potential. You've proved yourself a decisive man, so I don't expect you'll have any trouble deciding what to do. If you're interested, just step into the portal, and I will take that as a yes. Otherwise, well, I can offer you a battle you have no chance of winning. Rather an anticlimax after what you've just survived. Time to choose.
He basically gives you two options. Join him or die. I'm going to go ahead and spoil both endings so you've been warned. If you refuse to join him, he does keep his word. You do get put in a situation where you won't win. But if you do join him, everything will cut to black. G-Man will say a final word, and the credits will roll.
Wisely done, Mr. Freeman. I will see you up ahead.
So that was Half-Life. So I can see why this game took a long time to make. When I refer all the way back to when the game was in development, they actually showed off an early version of it at E3 in 1997, and then almost right after, they scrapped a lot of the resources that they had made for it and started the game almost completely from scratch. Now that's true dedication if I've ever seen it. Comparing the game to others that have came out more recently, if I had to choose between, I don't know, Far Cry 5 or Half-Life 1, I'd probably choose Half-Life 1 because I enjoy it a lot more. And that's how the game rivals over so many others. There are a few tedious sections that can get on people's nerves, but the overall experience is very joyful. You can sit down and play this game and have more fun playing it than you can games that have came out today. And I think that's why Valve has been able to stay prominent even though they release barely any games compared to other AAA developers. And if I was going to rate this game out of 100%, I'd give it probably a 98.62% out of 100. Half-Life is one of my favorite games, and honestly, replaying it recently gave me the idea of why not review it? And so that's what I did. If you enjoyed this video in particular, why not give it a thumbs up down below, and if you didn't like it, you can give it a thumbs down. It's really up to you. If you thought, hey, this video was pretty interesting, I wonder what else this guy's uploading, or hey, I thought this video was interesting, I can't wait to see what else he uploads in the future, you can hit the subscribe button. That is also down below with the like and dislike button. But in the meantime, this is where I get off.